At some point in everyone's therapy, some issue will come up for which our clients or patients, whichever word you use, I generally use the word patients, because I'm older, and that's the word, what I was trained to do. Most therapeutic approaches are rational, cognitive approaches, so they focus on insights. And that's helpful. And so it's helpful for people to know why they did a particular thing that may have hurt someone or created some degree of pain or suffering, and for which they need to forgive themselves. Because forgiveness occurs in the realm of the heart, not in the realm of the mind or the rational realm, that you need to enter into the realm of the heart and the higher self in order to be able to help people to forgive themselves. So how did I learn? Well, almost 20 years ago at this point, I initiated a divorce. And that was a very painful process for me to witness the pain that I produced in my now ex-wife and my two sons. And before that, I had always thought of myself as a person that helps people with pain. And nothing in my training was helpful for me to be able to deal with that degree of guilt and shame. I obviously needed forgiveness. I knew it wasn't going to come from my wife, and my children wouldn't be able maybe to forgive me for quite a long period of time. So the only place forgiveness could come was from myself. And by the way, nothing in my religious training was helpful to me. So I profoundly struggled for a period of time. And finally, over months and months, I was able to forgive myself. What the gift in that for me, and this is one of the big teachings of my work, is that oftentimes my own personal life struggles, by expanding my heart, increasing compassion, helped me to learn things that I can then pass on to my own patients and to the people that I supervise. And I learned a lot about the realm of self-forgiveness. I want to pass that on so that your clients can benefit from this. I learned a number of things. I learned, first of all, that forgiveness is a process, not a moment. And the process unfolds in its own timetable over a period of time. I also learned that there are certain phrases or prayers that are helpful to be able to utilize. So, and examples of those would be, help me to forgive myself. Help me to feel forgiven. Please forgive me. I write those prayers or phrases depending on what your client is more receptive to, which are the words. In fact, some people think of it as not even a prayer or a phrase, but a mantra. I write those on an index card and I hand it to the person and say, I want you to carry this with you for the next few weeks. And whenever you can, take some time out during your day and say those phrases. If you can say them out loud, that's even better, but if not, to say them to yourself. And people then will ask me, well, who am I asking for help from? I said, well, that depends on what your cosmology is. For some people, they may think of themselves as asking God for that. I say, what you're asking the help from is from your own higher self. There's an aspect of your consciousness that's higher than your ordinary consciousness. And so you're asking something outside of your ordinary consciousness to help you to be able to forgive yourself. So that's a first step. And what happens is then people do that for a period of time. Although what most commonly happens is the next time people come back into the office, I say, did you say those prayers? And they say, well, I did it once or twice and then I forgot about it. And they feel guilty. They feel guilty about it. They say, I didn't do my homework. And I just laugh. I said, that's what happens to almost everybody. That's how guilt works. It gets us not to do the thing that would be helpful. So the guilt unconsciously is getting you not to do that. And so with that kind of encouragement, then people then generally do those kind of prayers or mantras for weeks on end. And then I also encourage them, when possible, to go out into nature, to some local nature setting, whether it be out in the woods, which is where I did most of this work for myself. Some people do it by water settings. Oftentimes it can be very helpful because an ancient archetypal symbol of forgiveness is moving water. It's cleansing of the heart and spirit. So if you can go by water and say those prayers, it will expedite the process. Spending time in the woods or up in the mountains, desert for some people. Also, it gives you a chance to be away from anybody who might see you while you're saying these prayers, because the prayers may get you to be tearful. And oftentimes we don't want anybody to see that. So this way, being out in a nature setting. And in addition to which, the nature settings help us to get to deeper levels of consciousness. That's what they do. Ancient traditions oftentimes encourage people that when they were going through very difficult psychological, spiritual times, spend the time out in nature. After a while, then what we do is we do some guided imagery. And I'll give you an example of that. So I have a patient of mine, his name is Ralph. He's a Vietnam vet. He's in his 60s. And he's now, 40 years later, still carries the guilt and shame of what he did during that time in Nam, the people he killed, the villages he helped to burn. And he also feels guilty for what he didn't do. Like he felt that a number of the other men were more courageous than he was because they refused to fight at times. They stopped. And they went to prison for it, but he felt that they were more courageous than he was. He also felt carrying guilt for the guys that died. So numbers of times he would be with a buddy, and that all of a sudden that person would be shot and just die right in front of him. It happened numbers of times. And he feels guilty, like, how come I'm still alive and he died? So all of those are aspects of the guilt that he carried. The first time that I talked with him about those prayers, we did it in the office. And he started to feel better already just doing the prayers with some meditational breathing. So I had him say those prayers out loud and take some deep breath. Like that. And imagine that through the out-breath he was releasing some of the guilt and shame. And he started to feel lighter almost immediately. And he said, Bill, he said, you should be teaching this to the guys who are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They're going to be carrying the same guilt as me. And they could benefit from something like this, or you should teach it to the VA. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll get the opportunity to do that at some point. All right, now that you've been doing those prayers for a while, you've been spending some time out in the woods, you're more ready to do some guided imagery related to forgiveness. And so what I did is I had him close his eyes, did several minutes of meditational breathing, and then started to do what's called in our field the guided imagery. So I asked him to imagine that he was taking a walk into the woods, and that gradually over a period of time he was walking deeper and deeper into the woods. And I said to him, these woods are safe, nothing can happen to you. That was important because numbers of times guys in Vietnam feel very unsafe about going into the woods because it reminds them of the jungles, of where all of this happened to them. So I said, it's a safe place. And then gradually we come to a clearing in the woods. And in the center of this clearing is some very old, ancient tree deeply rooted into the earth. Now imagine coming out of the woods and approaching you is some image of forgiveness. And he started to be tearful and started to cry. And then afterwards I asked him, so what was happening? He said, well, here's an interesting thing. No image came into my mind of forgiveness, but what I did is I climbed up into the tree. and just sat in the branches. And I felt that the branches were comforting me. It like I was never comforted in that way ever by my parents. So in a way, I was beginning to imagine like this was a consoling, forgiving parent who was holding its son in my arms. And I gradually begin to feel a little bit more forgiveness. So then what Ralph and I did was, over a period of time that we did more and more of this imagery work over many months, he gradually began to feel more forgiven. So those are the aspects of this process of self-forgiveness that I encourage you to adapt in whatever way works for the way that you practice, and utilize some of those basic notions of the process of forgiveness to help your clients.